Deep beneath the streets of the city lies Bank Underground Station, in the heart of the financial district, and named after the Bank of England on Threadneedle Street. Bank Station and its interlinked neighbour, Monument Station, is one of the oldest and largest underground stations in the world. Bank opened its doors in 1900, and Monument Station, named after the monument for the Great Fire of London, opened in 1884. During the construction of Bank Station, engineers tried to cut beneath St Mary Woolnoth Church in order to install lift shafts and platforms. Despite public outrage, the railway company eventually purchased the crypt and built the Northern Line booking hall in its place. The entrance that once led into the crypt is now the entrance to Bank Station itself. Construction and extension of the underground frequently disturbs burial sites, graveyards and plague pits, containing the bones of thousands of plague victims, dating back some 300 years. The bones of the dead at Bank were moved to the City of London Cemetery in Ilford in 1900. Bank Station has a grim past. During the Blitz, the station was used as an air raid shelter, and the booking hall at Bank suffered a direct hit from a German bomb in January 1941. The bomb exploded in an escalator machinery room, with the blast travelling down the stairs and escalators to the platforms, killing 56 people and injuring 69 others. Alleged paranormal activity at Bank Station generally occurs in the early hours of the morning. Maintenance staff and commuters have been overwhelmed by a distinct, putrid smell that has been described as like the smell of rotting flesh, and a mysterious feeling of sadness and foreboding. Or could this just be a smell associated with drains, sewers and subsidence in a major metropolitan city? It is documented that St Mary Woolnoth had trouble with its crypt. Only a few years earlier, the church had to be closed because of the state of the crypt. This also sheds light on what an appalling state most city churches must have been in during the 19th century until their crypts were cleared. The following article explains. One of the oldest churches in the City of London has actually had to be closed in consequence of the effluvia arising from the dead bodies in the vault. This is St Mary Woolnoth. The congregation who worshipped there were not only annoyed but made ill, and the clergyman, after 3 services, generally went home with a sore throat. At times there would be no smell in the church. At others an intolerable odour came up in whiffs and gusts. It is computed that the remains of between 7,000 and 8,000 bodies were massed together within a few feet of the floor. In 1982, as the station was closing for the night, a worker was carrying out lift checks to ensure the station was completely free of passengers. He walked across the ticket hall, looked into the lift and was satisfied that it was empty. Moments later, he heard an unmistakable loud banging on the wooden doors of the lift, even though he had just checked it and knew there was absolutely nobody else around. There was no wind or drafts that he could identify, and he left the station unable to explain what he had witnessed. In Channel 5's 2006 documentary Ghosts on the Underground, a London Underground employee named Chris Archibald had a strange experience in the deserted station at about 2 a.m. The station had been emptied and locked up with no members of the public inside. But, checking the CCTV monitors, the employee noticed what appeared to be a little old lady standing in a long corridor, close to a sharp turn, known as a dogleg, leading to a staircase. Puzzled, the man grabbed a station radio and went to investigate. He claimed that as he approached the lady, she looked up straight at me, looked down again, and turned and started walking away. I actually started running down the corridor in order to catch her, but by the time I got to the dogleg, she'd disappeared, which I immediately thought as strange, as I knew I'd covered that ground an awful lot quicker than she could have walked from the dogleg to the stairs. The man went up and down the staircase, checking it thoroughly, but found both sets of gates were still closed and padlocked, and she was nowhere to be seen. He messaged his co-worker in the CCTV room and asked him to check the cameras to see where she could have disappeared to. The colleague checked over 100 cameras and there was no one to be seen. Reports of a ghostly woman dressed in black in the Bank district go back to the 19th century. Wearing black mourning clothes, a veil, and sobbing desperately, she has approached passers-by asking, "Have you seen my brother?" Her cries are so loud they have been heard in the tunnels as well as the platforms. This is thought to be the ghost of Sarah Whitehead, often called the Black Nun or the Bank Nun, and her story goes back to 1811 and the Bank of England. Often referred to as the Old Lady of Threadneedle Street, the Bank of England was established in 1694. Sprawling over several acres and fortress-like in construction, the current building dates from 1734 and is situated on what was one of the most bustling areas of London during Roman times. Over the years, the bank has witnessed its fair share of unrest and scandal. In 1782, St Christopher le Stock's Church, located behind the bank, was demolished so the bank could be extended. In 1797, James Gilray created a satirical political cartoon called The Old Lady of Threadneedle Street. The cartoon shows the Prime Minister of the day, William Pitt, the younger, wooing an old lady who represents the Bank of England. His true intention is to get his hands on the Bank of England's gold reserves, the gold coins in her pocket, and the money chest on which she sits. The old lady wears a gown made of the new £1 and £2 notes issued to replace gold coins in circulation. She sits provocatively on a chest, which represents the bank's reserves. The bank's garden courtyard, with its vaulted colonnades, appears to be home to another spirit, the sad ghost of a woman named Sarah Whitehead. Her apparition is known as the Black Nun and has been seen on many occasions, not just at the Bank of England, but also at Bank Underground Station. Sarah Whitehead was the sister of an apprentice cashier, Philip Whitehead, who worked at the bank from 1797 to 1810. Whilst employed at the bank, he adopted an extravagant lifestyle and began to speculate on the stock market. Philip Whitehead quickly became a young man about town and lived a lavish life that he could ill afford. Good-looking and ambitious, he quickly found himself and his 19-year-old sister living in a beautiful London mansion, racking up gambling debts, entertaining tricksters, and immersing himself into dubious activities. When the Bank of England discovered his misadventures, he was asked to resign, and this he did on the 2nd of August, 1810. Debts piled up and gambling losses were significant. Some of his so-called friends suggested forging some cheques to help him through the tough times. He did so and was discovered. Philip Whitehead was arrested and on the 30th of October was brought before the Old Bailey. Philip Whitehead was indicted on the first account of forging and counterfeiting a certain bill of exchange for over £87. He was then charged with 5 more counts of forgery. The crimes for which he was charged were against a number of city traders and not the Bank of England itself. The law took forgery very seriously, and it was a crime for which there was no pardon. Only 6 months earlier, 2 other Bank of England employees, Richard Armitage and C. Thomas, had been hanged at Newgate for forgery. At their trial, the judge declared his unhappiness at the many forgeries which for some time has been practised on the Bank of England and the commercial part of the metropolis. Whitehead was condemned to death at the Old Bailey on the 29th of January, 1812. Philip's friends kept the news of his crime and execution from Sarah in a vain attempt to protect her, but Sarah couldn't understand her brother's lengthy absence. She took matters into her own hands, visited the bank and asked to see Philip. A member of staff revealed the truth to Sarah. Her brother was a convicted criminal who had been executed at the scaffold. Unable to cope with the pain and the shock of the truth, Sarah refused to accept that her brother was dead. Stories differ, but some say for the rest of her life, Sarah returned to the bank every day asking if her brother was working and requesting to see him. Politely, she was told that he had not been in yet on that day. Dressed in black mourning clothes with a black veil and rouged cheeks, she would stand at the entrance waiting and hoping to see her beloved brother return. Some versions of the story say the bank staff had compassion for Sarah and often gave her money to ensure she did not starve. Some stories indicate that Sarah believed the bank was conspiring against her. She became a nuisance and the bank lost patience with her. An arrangement was agreed that they would pay her an annuity if she agreed not to visit the bank, which she accepted. It seemed her confusion and grief were overwhelming, and she still continued to visit the bank. There are varying accounts of Sarah's death and burial. Some report that she was around the age of 60 and was buried in the bank's garden. Some say she was much younger, possibly in her mid-40s, and may have been buried in the church of St Mary Woolnoth, the crypt of which was disturbed during the construction of Bank Underground Station. The phantom is named the Black Nun based on the appearance of her clothing, or the Bank Nun. Members of staff have seen her appear at the entrance of the building, roaming the corridors, stopping passers-by, desperately asking if they've seen her brother. She has also been seen as a dark shape in the small enclosed garden deep within the building itself. Jack Hallam, in his 1975 book Ghosts of London, reported that Mr. Thurston Hopkins saw the apparition while he was in the gallery of the bank. Looking down into the garden, a friend suddenly pointed out the figure of a woman in a black dress, moving with uncertainty along the path made up of old gravestones from St. Christopher Lostock Cemetery. Hopkins described the woman as hesitant, almost trying to feel her way like a blind person with a hollow and sad face. Abruptly, she dropped to her knees and began to beat the gravestones, sobbing and crying with uncontrollable grief. Within moments, she had disappeared. Hopkins was adamant that he had witnessed the Black Nun of the Bank of England. The oldest parts of the building are haunted by an apparition of a very tall man, said to be nearly 8 foot in height. His dark shadow startles bank staff and is said to linger in the bank's corridors. Appearing as a tall black mass, his apparition is said to be seen mostly in the evenings, once the bank's guards had been stationed. He apparently even rattled some of the sentries' rifles, terrifying some who left and never returned. It is thought that the dark spectre is that of Daniel Jenkins. Working as a clerk at the bank in the 18th century, William Daniel Jenkins was 6 foot 7 inches tall and considered to be exceptional in height for a man at this time. The average height for a man at this time was actually 5 foot 6 inches. Before his untimely death at the age of 31 in 1798, he had become scared that resurrectionists, or body snatchers, as they were more widely known, would steal his corpse and sell it for dissection. One source suggests Jenkins himself was said to have been considerably disturbed in his mind before his death from the apprehension that his body would be taken up after burial for the use of surgeons. Before his death, he expressed his concern to his friends at the bank. After his death, the friends asked the bank governor at the time if he could help, and it was agreed for Jenkins to be buried safely inside the bank's premises. This was done and recorded in the bank's archives. His lead-lined coffin was placed in the bank's garden court. Jenkins's death was recorded in the newspapers of the time. Mr. Jenkins, the bank clerk, remarkable for his height, died last week of a decline, the age of 31. He was buried very early on Sunday morning by permission of the governors of the bank inside the grounds inside of that building, which formerly was the burial ground of St. Christopher's Church. The outer coffin measured more than 8 feet in length. Upward of 200 guineas had been offered for his corpse by the surgeons. Jenkins remained at the bank until 1933 when his coffin was discovered during building work. His coffin bore a metal plate inscribed Mr. William Daniel Jenkins, died 24th of March 1798, aged 31. His remains were then moved to Nunhead Cemetery, where our story takes an unexpected twist. William rested in the eastern catacombs of Nunhead until the 1970s, when, ironically, the then abandoned cemetery was robbed. Thieves stole the coffin, tore it open, and stripped it of its lead for scrap metal, and allegedly scattered Jenkins' remains on the floor of the catacombs. Where his remains lie now, nobody knows. In 1975, a council workman saw a tall, dark stranger, dressed totally in black, emerge from the eastern catacombs before disappearing into the undergrowth. In 1976, a journalist contacted Ron Woolacott, a local historian, to ask him if someone in the cemetery might fit the spectre's description. Ron Woolacott, writing in the Friends of Nunhead Cemetery newsletter years later, found the best candidate for the ghost, the sorry sight of William Jenkins.